This is Ed Driscoll for PJmedia.com, and we're talking with Jim Geraghty of National Review Online on the last day of the National Review cruise here on the Lido deck of the MS Nieuw Amsterdam. And Jim, thank you for stopping by today.
Ed, this is probably the best location I've ever had for any type of podcast interview.
This is pretty darn swanky.
If you mentioned that you're in the Monte Carlo
yes,
little
we are in
spot,
the Monte Carlo. It's filled with rich Corinthian leather. It's sort of a recreation of the classic 77 Monte Carlo.
After this, I'm heading straight over to the roulette wheel by your little corner of the cabana and saying hello to Riccardo Montalban and all that. So,
what has been the mood of the people on the cruise after the shellacking?
I keep telling everyone that, despite all the really deeply disappointing election results, that this ship is full of good spirits. And by that I mean rum, vodka, and bourbon. Yes, exactly. So as the campaigns and elections guy on National Review, everyone has an opinion on what they could have done differently. Everyone feels the need to seek me out and share that with me and tell me as if I can use the time machine to go back and all that. And also there's a lot of variations. Well, why didn't Romney do this?
Right.
And most of this cruise, I've done my very level best to emphasize that I'm not Mitt Romney and I didn't approve this message. So that doesn't do much good to tell me this. Some of the ideas are good. Some of the ideas are bad. Some of these ideas are the things, like, why didn't he talk more about Benghazi? Well, he did mention it a few points, and a couple times it kind of backfired on him. And I'm not... There are very few silver bullet, if he had just used this line or this zinger. Right. I'm not convinced that was the...
And people really do want to have that. It's like the Super Bowl. They want to talk about that one big play that blows everything wide open.
I think it's bigger and structural. And what I'm coming around to, and you're hearing a little bit more on the stage and even a bit more on amongst the cruise goers, is you see, the party has a brand problem. And it's emphasizing it's not a Romney problem, although Romney created some of his own his own headaches. As my colleague Ramesh Ponnuru had pointed out, in a lot of these states, Romney ran ahead of the Senate candidate. In Indiana, in Montana, in North Dakota. These are not diehard Democrat states. These are areas that Republicans should be winning Senate races fairly handily, easily, and they ended up losing. And you look at, that just about every Senate race broke for the Democrats other than Flake in Arizona and Heller in Nevada. And at the same time, you have things like Michigan in a referendum voting down collective bargaining for public state employees. So the irony is that conservative ideas in a couple of these referendums did okay while gay marriage was passing and while marijuana was passing in certain states. I mean, I'm not saying it's one-sided, but I really think the little R after your name hurts you. And, Republicans would do well to look really hard at that.
Are Republicans starting to become branded as the mean, nasty, grumpy old white men party?
I'm starting to come around to think this is something the party really needs to examine. And it's tough because when we say the party, we don't mean necessarily the RNC. I don't think anyone thinks, Reince Priebus, is a mean, nasty guy or anything like that. I can talk about Romney a bit in a second, but I don't think Romney came across as a necessarily mean or nasty guy. But in a second, I'll talk about the 47% comment. I think it comes from a lot of different corners, and I think some of this comes from people who are not even necessarily Republicans, but who are seen as voices of the Republican Party, or certainly voices of conservatism in talk radio, in cable news, pundits and talking heads. And one of the things we need to address is that for a lot of folks outside the realm of elected office, controversy is a good thing. If you are saying something controversial, well, by golly, people who will tune in, even if they can't stand it, what's this person going to say next? What are they, can you believe this guy? Get a load of this guy. You can't do that in office. And what's interesting is we have a completely different incentive structure for the people who night after night are on the airwaves, radio and TV, giving the message of the right, and a completely different incentive structure for people who are in office, supposedly representing the right. And that's catching up with us. It's I think that the tensions are getting greater there. I mentioned Romney a little bit. In retrospect, I said there was no one silver bullet, but it'd be really fascinating to see how the race would have gone without a 47% comment. I think that did hurt Romney, and one of the things that made it hurt, somebody had said at lunch, and it was a really smart observation, Mother Jones was the Breitbart of this race. It was the sort of thing that a James O'Keefe would do, catching someone off guard. And here's the thing, is that we see, there was like hundreds of millions of dollars of television advertising in this race. Almost none of them had made any impact whatsoever. We've all heard the same gravelly voiced announcer who says, you just can't trust this guy. And after a while, it just turns into a drone. It just kind of turns into noise. I think it gets tuned out. But the 47% thing struck, kind of broke through because we weren't supposed to hear it. It was recorded in secret behind closed doors. Romney was speaking to these donors, and it became the perception of, well, this is what he really thinks. No matter what he says on the campaign trail, no matter what he says in these public interviews, behind closed doors, he's telling other rich people, 47% of this country is lost. They're never going to want to be independent and self-sufficient. They're caught up in this culture of dependency. And he said, at one point, I went back and I checked the quote, and he said in probably the most self-destructive way, there's nothing I can say to those people. Those people. It very issues, you can't get upset that they're not voting for you when you're referring to them as them, some alien other there. And his comments after the election have been, very much in that vein. The suggestion that basically he bought the votes of young people, Hispanics, and African Americans through large spending programs, and that kind of is saying, well, he bought their votes. And he bought their votes because people had their votes for sale because they're lazy. I mean, these are some very ugly implication of these comments. And while I don't want anyone to misunderstand me and suggest that I'm glad Obama won, I'm hearing stuff like this and thinking, well, at least we don't have to defend this guy for 4 years. Like, it would be very tough. If he had been elected, it would have been better for the country, but it would have been very tough for conservatism to have a president if he would periodically blurt out these types of comments and suggest that he doesn't think very much of nearly half the country. And that's a very, it's tough, like I said, tough to lead the country, tough to inspire people, tough to get them on your side when you fairly clearly don't think very highly of them. So.
Well, all that being said, though, I think you mentioned the election came down to 450,000 votes.
Yeah. 407 in. I did this shortly before I left on this trip, just to see, well, just how close was it? And a couple people interpreted it as saying, oh, you're saying it's within the margin of fraud. No. And a couple people saying that, well, you're saying it was illegitimate because it only came down to 407,000. Nah. Let me just say, you add up Florida, which was very close, about 40,000. Ohio, which was 110,000. Virginia and Colorado. 4 big states, tons of advertising. It's not like anybody doubted or didn't know these were really important states that were going to make a difference. You add them up, it's 407,000 votes, which is not a ton. Now, this is a podcast. So there's an old saying: if my aunt had balls, she'd be my uncle. That this was you can make too much of it, but it is kind of worth when people say, oh, this is a big problem for the Republicans. We should realize that Romney didn't come astronomically far. This was not Mondale versus Reagan or something like that. We need to do better next time around. And obviously, who knows what the political environment will be in 2016. But we shouldn't underplay the lousy spot that the Republicans find themselves in, and we also should not overplay the spot that they're in. So.
This isn't really your bailiwick, but do you have any thoughts on the relationship of culture and politics?
I very much think it's one of the phrases you've heard a lot on this boat, and even I was trying to stay off the internet for like the 3 or 4 days after the election, technically celebrating my anniversary. And, you can imagine what a cheerful fellow I was right after, staying up all night and hanging out with Glenn Beck and seeing these awful results. And it's one thing to say it, it's another thing to do it. And I kind of feel like we just need to change the culture. Okay, show me where's that light switch that, affects the culture, One of the things I hear a lot of is, well, we need a conservative daily show, and yeah, I'd love to see that. Alternatively, we could get Greg Gutfeld a better time slot. It'd be great to see conservative movies and all these things. And you're right. I also think, though, I'm not sure that it's just a matter of, when people say, oh, the culture trends left. Well, why? I also think some of this stuff is drastically overstated, as in this, the 47% thing. Last night we had a session in which there were 4 Brits, and they were talking a bit about welfare reform, both in the British and U.S. systems. And John O'Sullivan had mentioned a member of the British Parliament where, people would come to him and say, I'm in public housing and the banister is broken and somebody needs to do something about it. And this member of Parliament would say, well, you're able-bodied, why don't you do something about it? And he said 2 out of the 3 would come back a few weeks later and say, yeah, I fixed the banister and I felt great about it. I really feel like I gotten something done. And the third person had punched him out. So it doesn't always work. But you also look at the success of the U.S. Welfare reform back in the mid-'90s that, people get into this culture of dependency, and I get this terrible feeling that comments like the 47% suggest that it's a one-way transition, that once you're in the culture of dependency, you never come out. And none of us should underestimate the difficulties of getting people out of that. But the other thing is that people like feeling accomplished. They like, ultimately, it's harder to be self-sufficient and to go out and work for a living and get up and not have somebody handing you a check to take care of you. But you know what? it's you want to have a little pride. You want to be able to look yourself in the mirror in the morning, and that once welfare reform was put into effect and people started going to jobs, all these former welfare recipients realized they liked having jobs. They liked being able to bring home money and kind of be role models for their kids and stuff. So we sometimes forget the natural appeal of all that stuff. I'm like, I wonder how much of this has been a kind of, if not a self-fulfilling prophecy, something that's kind of cyclically feeding upon itself. Given a choice between public assistance or a good job, I think most people actually prefer to have a good job. I actually don't think people are that lazy or that, it's just the difficulty of finding a good job. There's this, periodic sneer I hear of, these young people want to stay in their parents' health care plans till they're 26. Well, there are a lot of entry-level jobs that don't offer health care plans, okay? I mean, it's not unreasonable to want to have health insurance in your early 20s. And if the job market does not provide something like that, then somebody's going to have to step into that gap. And, basically you could say, look at the Obama administration. They saw a need. They filled a vacuum. Young people in their 20s need health insurance. Hi there, we're from the government. We're going to make sure you can stay on mommy and daddy's plan. We may not like it for the sense that it infantilizes young people, but also I think a lot of people criticizing this kind of overestimate or underestimate how difficult it is to find a job in which you can take care of yourself, pay your rent, pay your transportation to get around, pay your taxes, and pay for your food and all that kind of stuff, and pay for health insurance in today's modern society. For 20, certainly if you don't have a college education, you have a very extremely tough time finding that. And we're finding even if you do have a college education, you have a tough time finding jobs like that.
So with all that being said, what is the status of the Tea Party's brand?
I don't think it's as totally damaged as we think it is. This is my second podcast of the week. The Pajamas Media is one of the very, very finest, but the guys at Ricochet do a pretty good one too. We were doing one earlier in the week, and they said, "Jim, what can people in the grassroots activists do tomorrow to bring out a better result in 2014 and 2016?" And the answer is, we're doing this on a Saturday, tomorrow Sunday. You can't no, rest. Believe it or not, everybody who was in the Tea Parties, they didn't disappear between 2010 and 2012. They were out there. They were knocking on doors. They were donating to candidates. There was a little bit less of the let's get together in the park and have a rally. Mm-hmm. And I think that was because we needed that in 2008 because people really were shell-shocked by the Obama win, and they needed that reassurance of, hey, we still speak for a lot of people. This country has not suddenly been transformed overnight. You're not alone. It was a really important message to hear then. Maybe we're going to need to hear that again this spring. But I actually think that what happened was the Tea Parties were getting just a little more focused, a little less rally, a little more, getting out and how do we get votes out for our candidates.
So sort of burrowing in the same way the New Left did in the late
somewhat,
60s and 70s.
Yeah. But the other thing which is worth noting is that the people who got involved in the Tea Parties, some of them had always been political junkies, but a lot of them were folks who were not that into politics before, the recession, TARP, the stimulus, Obamacare. These things just started mounting up one after another. And there's kind of this sense of, I heard from more than enough people, I'm a small businessman and I'm getting involved because I think in 4 years I won't have a small business if this keeps up. These people are at some point want to go back to their lives. And this is one of the reasons where I feel like, yes, we have, the fiscal cliff approaching and a whole bunch of big fights on Capitol Hill. They're going to have to be resolved. But I kind of am telling people who are the grassroots activists, it's okay to take a break. The holidays are coming up. It's okay to take a breather. I've seen some folks online, and thankfully not too much here on the cruise, but this sense of, we just have to fight harder. We have to redouble our efforts. We have to double our, we work 13 hours a day to elect our candidates this fall. Now we need to double that and work 26 hours a day, And I just, no, let people breathe and go back to their lives and take a little bit. We're not going to go dormant. We're not going to forget everybody's email addresses and their phone numbers. They will come back. But you can't expect your grassroots activists to operate at 110% in perpetuity. They need, these people aren't professional activists, and a lot of they're doing this out of just else and love of country. And to quote Saul Alinsky, after a while it gets to be a drag, man. And we don't want Tea Party activism to be something that people feel like it's a drudgery obligation they have to do. So I think they will come back, but I think you will see a certain. The fields will lie fallow for a few months as people kind of, a good friend of mine had said, there's nothing like putting your heart and soul into something 110% and then learning it wasn't enough. And that's how she felt about the 2012 elections. And that's why I think a lot of grassroots conservatives are feeling about this. And it doesn't mean you quit. It doesn't mean but I do think you're entitled to kind of, there is more to life than politics. And to kind of go, spend some time with your family, develop those. I would say, watch some football, but I'm a Jets fan, so I have nothing to watch for the rest of the year. But just, tend to those other fields of your life, and then we can come back early next year. There'll be confirmation hearing fights. If John Kerry gets picked as Secretary of State, there'll be a special election up in Massachusetts. There are other fights that will come down the road in 2013 and 2014 that we can gear up for and fight our butts off for. But I think right now I do kind of worry about some leaders of the Tea Party expecting everybody to come out, to not have any time away on say a nice little cruise ship or something like that. And I think I think we kind of need a way to make sure our base doesn't feel too dispirited and doesn't feel like this was all in vain. Because think about it, we still have 30 governorships, we still have a House majority in a look. If you couldn't knock down a House majority in a year when Barack Obama was getting 62 million votes, I'm not going to say the House majority is impregnable, but this House majority looks like it's going to be around for a really long time. You can chalk it up to gerrymandering. You can chalk it up to just having our voters better dispersed through the various House districts. But the bottom line is we have some tools in our tool chest we didn't have back in 2009.
And last question: what does your crystal ball say about 2014?
Well, I mean, the traditional history is that, sixth year tends to be absolutely miserable for a presidency. Bush had natural disasters like Katrina and Harriet Myers. You have the Lewinsky scandal for Clinton in 1998, Iran-Contra for Reagan in 86. Obviously you have Benghazi ready to blow up. Obviously, our CIA director is starting to look like an episode of Desperate Housewives. I mean, it's just this bizarre things are blowing up for Obama right now. It's very possible. Look, Barack Obama has spent his whole career campaigning, and we're going to be at a really interesting stage in his life in which he doesn't have anything left to campaign for. He may decide very early that he wants to campaign for Democrats in the 2014 elections because it's something to do. This is not a guy who likes to spend a lot of time in a room with John Boehner and leaders of both congressional parties hashing out a compromise. He gets, he's not good at it. He's not a consensus builder. He threw away apparently a very generous offer from Boehner during the debt ceiling fight. I think might have been that might have made things a lot smoother for him in the 2012. And I think he's just going to have it's very easy to imagine him getting very frustrated and wanting to go back to the golf course. This is not a man who really relishes every minute of being president, and there are times where he really just kind of comes across as a guy who's just, it's the common joke in 2009 was that he was the first man to step down into the presidency. He's more, look, he is the munificent sun god, and so really, getting into the haggling on Capitol Hill, quick, somebody get me a $2,000 a plate fundraiser somewhere, and at every speech he does outside the country, he talks about how great it is to be out of Washington. And I remember thinking, you spent 2 years insisting we had to send you there, and it's kind of the sense of like, if you hate the job so much, why did you campaign? Mr. President, all throughout this past year, we were trying to help you. You want to spend more time with the kids? Great. We want to help you do that too. So, anyway, with any luck, he'll run into trouble early and want to hit that golf course early and often.
Jim, thank you very much for stopping by, and we'll let you get on with the rest of the last day of the cruise.
All right. Enjoyed very much, Ed. Anytime.